They told you Harry Potter was a hero. They sold you the fairy tale. But what if I told you that the boy who lived was actually the boy who was systematically broken? This isn't about magic. This is about manipulation. This is about trauma. This is about a child who never stood a chance. Let me show you the psychological horror hiding behind the scar. Harry Potter's story begins with death. His parents murdered. A baby marked. But here's what nobody talks about. That night didn't just leave a scar on his forehead. It carved trauma into his unconscious mind so deep that everything that followed was inevitable. In Jungian psychology, we call this the shadow self, the parts of ourselves we bury, deny, refuse to acknowledge. Harry's shadow wasn't just Voldemort. It was abandonment. It was worthlessness. It was the belief that he only mattered when he was dying for someone else. Dumbledore knew this. He counted on it. Think about it. A 1-year-old survives the killing curse. What does the greatest wizard alive do? Does he take the traumatized child somewhere safe? Somewhere loving? No. He leaves him on a doorstep. In the cold. With a letter. With people he knew would abuse him. This wasn't negligence. This was design. Dumbledore understood depth psychology better than anyone. He knew that trauma creates compliance. That broken children become obedient soldiers. That a boy raised in darkness would walk into death without question. Harry spent 10 years in a cupboard under the stairs. 10 years. Let that sink in. While other children learned love, safety, trust, Harry learned that he was a burden. That he didn't deserve space. That his existence was something to hide. Clinical psychology has documented cases like this. Children raised in extreme neglect develop complex trauma patterns. They struggle with self-worth. They become hypervigilant. They attach desperately to anyone who shows them the smallest kindness. They believe fundamentally that they don't deserve to live. Does this sound like hero psychology to you? Or does it sound like programming? The Dursleys didn't just neglect Harry. They actively erased him. No birthday celebrations. No acknowledgement. Dudley got mountains of presents while Harry got nothing. This isn't just cruelty, it's systematic psychological abuse. It's gaslighting. It's teaching a child that their reality doesn't matter. That their pain is invisible. That they should be grateful just to exist. And when Harry showed signs of accidental magic, when he showed any sign of power, they punished him. Locked him up. Starved him. They taught him that his strength was something to fear. Something to suppress. Something dangerous. By the time Hagrid crashed through that door, Harry wasn't a blank slate. He was already broken in exactly the way Dumbledore needed him to be. Now here's where it gets darker. Harry's first year at Hogwarts. The Philosopher's Stone. Everyone celebrates how brave he was, how he saved the day. But let's apply some behavioral psychology here. An 11-year-old child, barely introduced to this world, decides to face a dark wizard alone. What? Because he's brave? No. Because he's been conditioned his entire life to believe that his value comes from sacrifice. That he doesn't matter unless he's saving someone else. That his life is worth less than others. This is textbook martyr complex. And it only gets worse. Every single year Harry faces death. Every single year he's put in impossible situations. The Chamber of Secrets? A 12-year-old descends into a monster's lair. The Dementors? Creatures that literally feed on trauma, and they're stationed at a school. The Triwizard Tournament? His name gets entered against his will, and instead of anyone protecting him, they force him to compete. Can we talk about that? A 14-year-old is magically bound to a contract he never agreed to, and the adults just shrug and say rules are rules. What kind of psychological trauma does that create? It teaches him that consent doesn't matter. That his autonomy is irrelevant. That the system will sacrifice him and he just has to accept it. This is learned helplessness. This is trauma psychology in action. And through it all, where's Dumbledore? Watching. Waiting. Orchestrating. He admits it later, doesn't he? That he knew. That he always knew Harry would have to die. That he was raising him like a pig for slaughter. Those are his words. Not mine. The greatest wizard alive spent years psychologically preparing a child for execution, and we call this wisdom? We call this love? Carl Jung talked about archetypes, the hero, the mentor, the shadow. But what happens when the mentor is actually the manipulator? When the hero is actually the victim? Harry embodies what Jung called the wounded healer, someone whose trauma becomes their identity, whose pain becomes their purpose. But here's the sick twist: Harry never heals. He never processes. He just keeps bleeding and calling it bravery. Let's talk about his relationships. Hermione and Ron. We're told these are his best friends, his chosen family. But look closer at the psychological patterns. Harry doesn't trust them. He keeps secrets. He pushes them away. Why? Because every parental figure he's ever attached to has died or betrayed him. His parents, dead. Sirius, dead. Dumbledore, manipulative, then dead. Lupin, distant, then dead. Harry's attachment style is textbook disorganized. He craves connection but fears it. He wants love but doesn't believe he deserves it. So he keeps his friends at arm's length while simultaneously depending on them completely. This isn't friendship. This is survival bonding. It's what happens when traumatized people cling to anyone who doesn't actively hurt them. And Sirius. Let's talk about Sirius. Harry meets his godfather, finally, someone who wants him, who chose to be in his life. And what happens? The system keeps them apart. Letters. Brief conversations. Never enough. And Harry, desperate for family, idealizes Sirius completely. He doesn't see a reckless, traumatized man who spent 12 years in magical prison. He sees salvation. He sees the father he never had. This is called parasocial attachment in character psychology. It's when someone projects all their needs onto a person who can never actually fulfill them. And when Sirius dies, when Harry watches him fall through that veil, something in him breaks permanently. After that, Harry stops trying to live. He only tries to die properly. Order of the Phoenix shows us the full psychological breakdown. Harry's angry, violent, pushing everyone away, having visions of Voldemort. Can we acknowledge what's actually happening? He's experiencing severe PTSD. He watched Cedric die. He was tortured. He's having intrusive thoughts and nightmares. His scar hurts constantly, that psychosomatic pain from psychological trauma. He needs therapy. He needs support. He needs adults who protect him. Instead, he gets Umbridge torturing him and Dumbledore ignoring him. The psychological damage compounds. The mental health patterns spiral. And everyone just expects him to keep functioning. To keep being the hero. Nobody asks if the hero wants to be saved. The connection between Harry and Voldemort is where shadow psychology becomes literal. They share thoughts, emotions. Harry feels Voldemort's rage, his pleasure in killing. In Jungian analysis, Voldemort isn't just Harry's enemy, he's Harry's shadow self made manifest. He represents everything Harry could become if he embraced his trauma, his anger, his darkness. The Horcrux inside him isn't just a plot device. It's a metaphor for how we carry our abusers inside us. How trauma becomes part of our identity. How the darkest parts of ourselves are often planted there by others. Harry spends years terrified he'll become Voldemort. That's not hero psychology. That's someone who's internalized their abuse so deeply they can't separate themselves from it. The prophecy. That cursed prophecy. Neither can live while the other survives. This single line becomes Harry's prison. It takes away his agency, his choice, his future. Dumbledore reveals it in 6th year, and what does Harry do? He accepts it. Immediately. Without question. Why? Because he's been psychologically conditioned to accept that his life has no value beyond this purpose. The prophecy isn't fate. It's confirmation of what he already believes about himself. That he was born to die. That his existence is only meaningful as a sacrifice. This is suicidal ideation dressed up as destiny. 7th year, Harry's on the run. Hungry. Hunted. Watching his friends suffer because of him. The guilt compounds. The isolation deepens. He's wearing a Horcrux that literally amplifies negative emotions, and nobody thinks to take it off him permanently. They just pass around the psychological torture device like it's a chore. Ron leaves. Hermione's desperate. And Harry keeps pushing forward because stopping would mean facing everything he's been running from his entire life. The trauma. The loss. The fact that he's 17 years old and has nothing, no family, no home, no future. Just a forest. And a choice that isn't really a choice. When Harry walks into that forest to die, everyone praises his courage. His nobility. His sacrifice. But let's call it what it really is. A suicidal teenager who's been groomed since birth to believe his death is inevitable. He doesn't fight it. He doesn't rage against it. He doesn't even seem sad. He just accepts. He opens the snitch. He raises the resurrection stone. He sees the ghosts of everyone who died for him and they tell him it's okay. That it's easy. That dying is like falling asleep. This is the most disturbing scene in the entire series. And we celebrate it. Harry's psychological state in that moment is what we call dissociative surrender. He's so traumatized, so conditioned, so exhausted that death feels like relief. He's not being brave. He's being compliant. He's doing what he was always told to do. What Dumbledore planned. What the prophecy predicted. What his trauma prepared him for. He lies down in front of Voldemort and waits to die because that's what good victims do. They make it easy. And then he survives. Again. The boy who lived becomes the man who couldn't escape. But here's what nobody talks about. Harry's trauma doesn't end when Voldemort dies. PTSD doesn't vanish because the threat is gone. The psychological patterns don't reset. The behavioral psychology that's been carved into him over 17 years doesn't just disappear. In the epilogue we see Harry as an adult. He's married. He has children. He's named them after dead people, his parents, Snape, Dumbledore. Even 19 years later he can't let go. He can't move forward. He's still living in his trauma. Still defined by his losses. Still unable to exist as anything other than the boy who survived. His son is scared of being sorted into Slytherin, and what does Harry say? That one of the bravest men he knew was in Slytherin. He's talking about Snape. Severus Snape, who bullied him for years, who terrorized students, who only protected Harry because of an obsession with his dead mother. This is what trauma does. It makes you defend your abusers. It makes you rationalize the people who hurt you because accepting the truth would mean facing how much damage they caused. Harry never got help. Never got therapy. Never processed what happened to him. He just buried it like he buried everything else. That's not healing. That's survival. And there's a difference. The psychology community has studied fictional characters for decades because they reveal truths about real psychological patterns. Harry Potter is a case study in how we romanticize trauma. How we mistake suffering for strength. How we take broken children and call them heroes instead of giving them help. His story isn't inspirational, it's a warning. About the cost of forcing someone into a role they never chose. About what happens when we prioritize the mission over the person. About how psychological trauma doesn't make you stronger, it just makes you better at pretending you're okay. Carl Jung said that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Harry never made his unconscious conscious. He never examined his shadow self. He never confronted the psychological disorders that his childhood created. He just kept moving forward, kept fighting, kept surviving because that's all he knew how to do. The prophecy wasn't fate, it was a self-fulfilling cycle of trauma and learned helplessness. The scar on his forehead was just a mark. The real scars were invisible. And those are the ones that never stopped hurting. So when you think about Harry Potter, don't just see the hero. See the orphan who deserved better. See the child who was manipulated by the people who should have protected him. See the teenager who was taught that his value was in his death. See the man who couldn't escape his shadow because no one ever taught him he didn't have to carry it alone. This is the real story of the boy who lived. Not the one who triumphed, but the one who survived despite everything trying to break him. And maybe, just maybe, that's not something to celebrate. Maybe it's something to grieve. Because Harry Potter never escaped his shadow. He became it. And he called it destiny.